when I first went to Manchester United, it was hardly any rules. But what they did the right things. And if they didn't do the right things, they owned it.
This is McClaren Performance.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the McClaren Performance Podcast, the podcast where I talk to my dad about everything football, performance, psychology, and together we try and provide something useful for those of you listening. Now, this week comes off the back of me and Dad being on holiday for the past few days, and with that we've had the chance to have a bit of a read. It's usually always my chance to get through books that I want to get through. Well, I ain't done great, to be fair. I'm about towards the end of a book that I want to talk about today, which is Belonging by Owen Eastwood, a high-performance coach that specialises in culture building. Dad has also read The Culture Code and also High Performance by Jake Humphrey and Damien Hughes, so we'll be discussing that as well. But before we get into that, Dad, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. As you say, a good couple of weeks away and just getting ready for the chaos that will happen when the players come in on the 27th, and a little bit of planning, obviously, before that. So refreshed, ready to go. And looking forward to the next challenge. And it was certainly good on holiday, very relaxing, but also an opportunity to do some work by reading some books. And as usual, like we do, learn something new every day.
Exactly. One of the things we were talking about before was when I did the episode on Gareth Southgate, talking about his Nations League games and stuff. And you said you had some thoughts on that as well. So we might touch on that for about 5 minutes at the start. What do you think of those games in Nations League, the reaction to the performances and everything around it, really?
Yeah, it's normal, the reaction. Everybody wants to see England win and play well. And, as soon as they don't, and it's not very good, then there will be criticism. And I think Gareth knows that, accepts that. He's had a lot of good. He has to take some bad to achieve the goal, which is to win the World Cup. And that's the goal. So that's what he's aiming towards, and that's what he's planning for. And two things, really. And the main thing is calling up players. It's the end of a long season. Do they really want to be there? And at the present moment, their motivation could be other people's, clubs, teams' motivation could be higher than England's at the present moment, because every game against England, everybody wants to win. And what Gareth did was he experimented. He picked a squad. He changed the team, changed personnel, changed shape, changed tactics, and he's experimented. And he's looking at new players, players which probably wouldn't get an opportunity before. And this is normal. And what I tell you something, I mean, he'll be sat here thinking, well, that was a good 4 games, although the criticism he got and the results, performances weren't what he wanted. He'll certainly be clearer in his mind what England is all about, what it takes, things you can change, things you can't change, things you can introduce, things you can't introduce, what's in, what's out, what do we bring in. All them things will have been answered in the last 2 or 3 weeks, training camp, games, top games, good opponents. And yes, players, performances, what we saw weren't up to the standards of what we've seen in the past. But he's got, I think, another couple of friendlies to go, and then he'll get ready for the World Cup. And I'm positive he'll be there. He'll know his best team. He'll know his squad roughly. And yes, 1 or 2 people's situations left out, maybe try and get back in, but certainly he will be in a far better position after them 4 games than if they'd have won. Expectations all of a sudden are greater, higher. He hadn't tried things. He just played safe, and he didn't play safe. He took risks, and some worked, some didn't. And you accept the criticism. He won't be reading it. I hope he doesn't take any notice, and he sticks to the plan, because he will have a plan. That's what they've been doing the last how many years he's been in charge. It's worked before. We have to trust him, and we have to have the faith, and the players do as well. And and move on. Get yourself recovered. A couple of friendlies, World Cup.
Do you think it's a problem now whereby before we had friendlies and now you have these Nations League games? Is it hard for a manager to then experiment, like you said there, because Gareth's experimenting in games, but the weight of the games are a bit more now that they've got these group stages, tournaments, things like that. Is it difficult for an England manager now to find time to find his best team and experiment with different options?
Oh, these are great games. We're hungry.
Yeah.
You could see that. Great spirit. Italy, Germany. Hard games. That's what you want.
Yeah.
That was always my thing with England was, the friendlies and the small nations. You get nothing out of them. You don't learn anything. Playing Italy, Germany, Hungary, he's learned so much. And the next two games, he learned so much from them as well. And it's better good opposition, because they're the type of teams that you need to beat if you're going to win a World Cup. And, England, I think, are fortunate. It's quite an easy group. They'll go through that. And then the tournament begins. So he has a little way to go. But the experimenting, I'm positive, I'm sure will at the moment, I think we saw at the end of June a big squad try things, and the focus was there. The next, it will come to there.
Yeah.
By the time the World Cup comes, it will be there.
Yeah.
And my advice will be stick to the plan. You've got it. And I'm sure it will be successful.
Good. All right. Moving on. Let's get into the books we've read and what we've learned over the holidays. Then, which one do you want to start off with? Yours? Culture Code, High Performance. What have you been learning, especially going into Manchester United now? What are the lessons you're taking in?
Well, I like that book, The Culture Code. I know it's probably backwards, but from Daniel Coyle. I've read it 2 or 3 times, and I always just dip in, dip out, because they're always great stories. And the 3 main chapters to creating a culture are, creating safety. That means, there was one experiment in a book, and somebody went into a hospital and wanted to know the mistakes that the hospitals were making. And there was various different teams within the hospital. And the best team, or who they thought was the best team, came out the top with the most mistakes. And the others didn't make any mistakes, or hardly. And that wasn't the case. And what they found was that because the top team, the top department, was so safe in their environment that they were actually allowed to make mistakes. They were allowed to share them. They were allowed to talk to them. So they divulged every bit of information on the research, whereas other departments didn't have that safe environment, didn't want to admit they were making mistakes, didn't want to own the mistakes, therefore didn't write them down, didn't tell the researchers. Therefore, they thought, wow, they hardly make any mistakes. But it was just the safety of the environment that department, or them departments who came up with the most mistakes, had the safety to actually make mistakes, admit failure, and write them down, share them, and move on. So I thought that was so interesting, so right, that many times, we've sat in team meetings and we've had a right go at the team, and the manager says, right, come on then, anything to say? You've just gone around criticizing everybody and you're going, what, you have your say now, what do you want to say? And that is not a safe environment in which you can actually come out. So that was number one. Number 2 was vulnerability, sharing vulnerability. And that means stories of vulnerability, bad injuries, bad losses, how you're brought up, traumas in your life that you've gone through, admitting that I need help in this. Sinfield, who is a rugby league, now actually coaching rugby union for the defence. But I watched a thing about Sinfield, Leeds Rhinos. He was the captain, been there all his life at Leeds, a real club man, and he was just the heart and soul of Leeds Rhinos, and he would actually admit, guys, look, I need help. I need help. I can't do it on my own. I need help. And they expected him to be the leader and the macho man. And I don't need any help. I'm the leader. Just follow me. And he had that vulnerability and shared that. And that's, they called him a humble leader. And that's what he was. And the third thing was purpose. Everybody has to have a purpose. Why are we doing this? And getting the why, especially finding the why, is, I think, the start of it. Why are you playing? Why are you playing at this certain club? What do you want to achieve? Why do you want to achieve that? And that's got to be in a personal why. What's your legacy? What do you want to leave? That's got to be. I'm positive also in like a family, because a lot of people play because of their family, their help, support that they've had. And then if you're at the club, what's the why? Why are you playing at a certain club? So you got to find out the why. And that's a personal story. And they're saying that the more you share that, the higher the purpose becomes, and the gelling of the team stronger.
I think there's, like you said, the three things there. The one, we call it in psychology, obviously, psychological safety, where there's that ability for players, for everyone really, to experiment, to fail, to learn from those failures, to then improve from that. So there's that psychological safety. I think the other thing was that open and honest leadership. We always talk about having hierarchies in the team, and then those leaders within that, I think, being open and honest to everybody else. And then through that kind of communication, you get that cohesion, that collaboration, and you get good teamwork. But the main one there, actually, I've got to go back to that psychological safety, because I heard a great quote actually just before we were doing this. I was watching something else, and somebody said, freedom is not freedom until it's freedom to fail. And I think what you want in a team is players to have that ultimate freedom within themselves and their job and what they do, but freedom within that to experiment. The last thing, though, I think one of the most interesting ones, and what ties into what I've just read, the Belonging book by Owen Eastwood, is the why and the purpose to the team. I think Owen Eastwood was talking about it in terms of having our us story. So what is our story? So just like, I guess, an example of a club would just be Man United in this case, is what is the story of Manchester United to where it has got to now? What is the story behind it? What is that narrative? What makes us as individuals within this team unique from everybody else? And then to that as well, what makes us different to them as well? I think it was Sir Alex, it was someone like that, I can't remember, who was saying how important it is to have a team that you put that focus on, to say, we're beating that team this season, we're beating that team, and really differentiating between they are them and we are us. So it's us and them, and it's creating that simple narrative, that us story within the team that kind of drives you forward. What are your thoughts on that exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're going into Manchester United and having to create that culture, a culture. And that's one of the most fascinating things. And I think you were talking about purpose, and it's a great story. I think in one of them books, Culture Code, or definitely the High Performance book, in which I think South Africa were preparing for the World Cup, the final against England, and they Owen Eastwood, I think, has a great chapter on the building of that South African team from an all-white team to having, I think, winning the World Cup with 10 black players. And the captain was, I think, a guy called Koshi, and he was in charge of the team. And he asked everybody leading up to the World Cup, everybody to bring in photographs of their family and talk about their family to create that bond and that purpose and that why. And he said one of the players, he only came with one photo, and that photo was a photo of the South African rugby team. And he said, "What have you done? I asked you to bring a photo of your family." And he said, "I don't have a family. When I was young, my mother died, my father died, I had no siblings, I was on my own, I was brought up in whatever. I don't have a family. So I brought the photo of the only family that I've got, this team." Wow, how powerful is that in front of the whole team? How emotional. And he said it was a very emotional, tearful moment, but the moment in which the team really bonded and added another why to the purpose.
It was a cause to fight for, isn't it? I think that's the thing. It's that simple cause to have as well. You were just talking about, I think, the All Blacks there, and I had the same story from the Belonging book, which is the cricket team, the South African cricket team, the Proteas, I think you call it, and how they were so divided within the team. Obviously, during apartheid, it was a white team only, and they were the Springboks. And then after apartheid, they had the different ethnicities coming into that as well. And then with that, they had kind of not conflict, but a lack of communication within the team because of this history before that they never addressed. So they had to have they went away, had these team meetings where they got the players to address the situation, really. And some players admitting that their families still call the team, the Springboks. They were still back in the past. So there were players rooted in that, but also players that were looking forward as well, being different ethnicities, wanted to be part of the team. And so they had to really have this meeting to get through it. And then the improvement in performance after that, because then they had a whole solid kind of identity within that. He does a thing where a great thing, really. And he's talking about with England, with Gareth Southgate, who was looking at the history looking at the history of England, and then you look at the badge and you go, right, the 3 lions, and what do the 3 lions stand for? And then you get the history of England, what it means to be English and all this. And he'd present to the players and talk about it, and then talk about, right, what are we going to put into this? That kind of leads into another point is, you have that us story, and you have the history of the team and what it means. And then he talks about kind of solidifying that in having set values. So, right, here's all the past stories of the club or the country or whatever. And this is the situation we face now. Here's the people we have in this room, different ethnicities, all sorts of different people with different values. Let's bring all this together into 3 or 4 solid set values for the team to get behind. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do, especially when I think some teams do that where they go, a manager might go, this is what I want my team to be, this. But I think it's best when it's the whole team collaborating, the players collaborating and saying, what is, and we talked about, and we talked about before, what's the Manchester United way? You always talk about the Man United way, but what is that? Can you say in 3-4 words what the Man United way is? Could a Man United player say that? And I think that's a big thing. And it's easy. It sounds like such a small thing, but to me, that's the thing that is a foundation of. It's a great stat. I got it here, that what Owen Eastwood was saying before. 70% of human behavior is determined by whatever environment you're in. And it was actually a chapter, I think not in one of the books you read, it was a different book, where it was saying how a player on average takes 3 years when moving from one club to another. It takes 3 years, I think, for that player to get back to the standard that he was before, because he's not just learning to be in a new environment. Yes, there's that psychological aspect of it and being psychologically safe, but there's also you're learning to play with those set of players in that specific system. Then when you go to a new team, you're also learning to play with those new players, and it's a different way of playing, the sort of way, learning how to pass to that player, or learning how they want the ball to be, or whatever like that. So there's all these changes. It takes a while to adapt, and we always look at players as such individuals, and we think that big signing that will translate into the next club that they go to. But it's all an environment, it's all a culture, it's all a collaboration. And they're almost like jigsaw pieces within the puzzle. You've got to understand how they kind of fit within that.
I think you're right, and you summed that up. And I think the big thing in finding the why, and to start with, is what's the goal? I think in the high performance book, it was someone talked about the BHG, the big hairy goal. What is it?
Yeah.
What is the goal?
Mm.
And there's a great bit about Sean Dyche in there going to Burnley and him saying what the big hairy goal was: get Burnley from the Championship into the Premier League and to actually stay there.
Yeah.
And it was, a 5-year plan. And he talked about, and it was really simple, because he went in and he said, right, to get up and to stay up, we just need to keep it simple, and we need to do these 3 things. And these 3 things were non-negotiable. They were simple, and they said in the conversation they had with Sean that they spotted 3 non-negotiable behaviours pinned on the wall. One of them was noses point in the same direction.
Mm.
The minimum requirement is maximum effort. And just give us your legs, hearts and minds. And that was it. And everything was encompassed in them 3 non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, that is so simple. A big hairy goal. There it is. How do we achieve it? Nose is pointing in the same direction, right bus, right seats, heading in the right direction. Minimum requirement is maximum effort. Just give everything, and give us your legs, hearts and minds. Put everything into it. It's so simple that every day, every game, the feedback must be so easy, because if we did them 3 things, we'd win. Yeah. And look what he achieved in his time at Burnley. So I think that the why, setting goals, and the other thing, which I can't remember which book it was in, but they talked about cultural architects.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I think Gareth spoke, I think it was the high performance one, and Gareth spoke about that, finding within the squad your cultural architects. And they are usually players who are liked and admired by everybody in that dressing room. So that's either through their status, that they've been a great player and they've got that, he's the man. It's either by attitude. It's like the Sinfield of Leeds Rhinos. He had the attitude, wasn't the best. He admitted that. That was his humility. But he prepared the best, worked the hardest. And his attitude was to make people around him better. That was his attitude as a leader of that. And the third one is liked and admired through talent. Oh, he's a good player. So absolutely silent, doesn't say much, doesn't have to say anything, just demonstrates, he's all for the team, maximum effort, and he gives his heart and soul and his legs to the club. And they're the cultural architects that you need to find. So going into Manchester United was straight away, in my mind, is who are the cultural architects?
Yeah.
Who can you build this team around? And these cultural architects, there's not one leader, there's not one captain. There are a few that we call lieutenants, and they're all connectors, and they're all connecting each other, some through the status, some through their talent, and some through their attitude to make those around them better. But I think it's up to everybody, if they're a cultural architect, to make those around them better. And McGee, and why do you do it? and that big hairy goal, and what's the purpose and the why. McGeechan talked about the Lions, and in his speeches, famous speeches, and he was always famous for his speeches, he said to the group, just remember why we're doing this, because in 30 years' time, we'll be able to walk down the street and all of a sudden on the other side of the road will be a teammate from that Lions team that won in Australia. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. You just give them that look. You just look. And I read that and I thought, wow, that is so powerful, that look, because I've had that. I felt that. And I remember we talked about that with 20 when we went a couple of weeks ago, to celebrate the title, the championship, and meeting them players. It's like going up to Theo Janssen. You don't have to say anything. You just look, you just know that time together was special. And them things are powerful, and they're the things that create culture.
I think there's two things you kind of touched on there. Was like, as a coach, as a manager, you almost can't directly affect the culture of a dressing room. And you talk about there's the cultural architects, and I'd talk about it in terms of senior players. All you can really do is manipulate the environment that's already there by picking your cultural architects, picking your senior players. You've got to look at what you've got and say, right, who are the players that are setting the example that I want? And that's not just the captain. That's also 3 or 4 more players alongside of that as well. But on top of that, you're talking about, I think it relates to what Owen Eastman was talking about as well in his book, was how a good leader can articulate the vision going forward. So like Sean Dyche there can say, right, this is the story of Burnley. We're going to go from the Championship and we're going to stay in the Premier League. So it's a great story. It's like, that's the vision, and you can see that in the future. But also he takes that vision and grounds it into reality as well. So it's like, he's got that right. Oh, we're going to get to the Premier League, but everyone's saying, how are we going to do that? All right, here's 3 non-negotiables set in stone. This is the work that we do. And then I think a great leader has that ability to communicate and storytell and act, to give that vision and then ground it into the reality of the day-to-day. Here is our set values. This is the work that we do, and then get everybody on board with that as well. It's simple. It's really simple, really. But I think it's the hardest thing to do as well, because you have to be able to enact it. We could talk about this now and probably have 3-4 points, right? This is how we build a culture. But I think anybody can say that. You see it all the time. Everyone can say how football should be done, but it's the actual getting 11, 20 squad of players to enact that and believe in what you're talking about, which is by miles the hardest part of not just football, top football, really.
I think during one of the chapters, talking about Southgate and England, and he talked about it, and he said culture is all about people. And we can all have these big hairy goals, and we can all have these sayings written on the wall and this and that, but it's about people, and it's about getting the right people, and the right people who buy in, the right people who have got the character to get through that. It's one of the reasons, why my first and most important signing was Gareth Southgate for Middlesbrough, because he had the status. He was an England player, captain of Aston Villa. He had the attitude, unbelievable attitude, and he had the talent. He could do the job. And all them 3, I went, I want that. That's what I want to epitomise. And everybody within that dressing room, and he brought people along to that. And the key thing, the other thing that I read about, somebody said there are 5 cultures. There's the star culture, the Galacticos of Real Madrid from years ago, and they have success, they have failures, they don't sustain it. It's volatile. People fall out. It's not a happy camp, but capable of winning things. And that was Real Madrid, wasn't it? And they have, I think, an engineering one, and there were 2 or 3 others. But the biggest one, the most important one, was having a commitment culture where your people committed to the big hairy goal, to the non-negotiables, to the cultural architects, to what we need to do. And hard work isn't just physically hard work, but hard work is how do we bond this team? And I must be a part of that. So a commitment culture is about people who are actually committed and all into the cause, heart, soul, and legs to that, creating a safety environment where they're valued and respected. They're the three main things of a commitment culture: is respect, value, and safety. If people feel that, then you've got a great culture, and then you go in places. And I always used to think, what creates that? Is it winning that creates that?
Yeah.
It's chicken and egg. What comes first? And Southgate, I thought, hit the nail on the head when it's all about the character of your people.
Yeah, it's mind. We're talking about mind reality, isn't it? It's one affects the other, and it's that feedback loop. I would say mind, action, result, and it's that feedback loop of that. And the job of a coach or anyone is to interrupt that feedback loop, that circuit, and affect it through the mind, really, through the culture, to change the winning, the reality around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really intrigued with the non-negotiables, and I know there was three with Sean, but I've written quite a few, quite a few down, which I think, if I had to write non-negotiables down, then these are the things that we need to do. Things like we all need to connect with each other. Games are won Monday to Friday. You get Monday to Friday, right? Games are won on Saturday. You've got to, everyone has to bring energy to the Pochettino talked about that, creating a culture. Everybody, if no one brought energy, he got them out. They had to bring some kind of energy to the group. You have to be ready you have to be ready to train. You have to be ready to play. You have to be ready to impact as a sub. You have to react. A lot of people now, body language, arms up in the air, got to react to get that ball back, win that ball back, whatever situation, react quick. Don't think about it. Don't go out of the game. You've got to accept the rules, the conditions. You've got to accept the consequences if you do things wrong. You've got to commit. You've got to be a class act. You've got to be a class act, especially in today's football. You have to be front foot aggressive, all in, heart and soul, honesty, at times brutal honesty, delivered in the right way. I like this one from Eddie Jones. He said, you've got to enjoy the grind. And I've changed it. I put, you've got to endure the grind.
Yeah.
Because no one enjoys it. And then I think the last thing which sums it up is, and I used to go, when I first went to Manchester United, it was hardly any rules. It was hardly any rules, but what they did the right things. And if they didn't do the right things, they owned it.
Yeah.
And they suffered the consequences and accepted the consequences. And I think if you've got them non-negotiables around that, I think you can't go wrong. But in the end, it's the people accepting, committing, and doing it consistently every day.
Well, thanks, Dad, for another interesting conversation. I guess what kind of ended up being about how to build winning culture, and specifically looking at that with Manchester United as well. Because I think for me, building a culture is probably the most important thing. I'll go back to that statistic again from Owen Eastwood, that 70% of human behavior is determined by whatever environment you're in. So I think it's the most important aspect of performance. I always talk about my philosophy. It's the foundation that comes before the mind, before the action, before the result. It's absolutely the foundation, the base from which everything else grows. And I think from that conversation, there's 4 points, really, 4 things I can take away that you could implement yourself, or I could as well, in terms of building culture. And one of that is what I always talk about anyway, which is hierarchy, but specifically having a open and honest leadership. We're talking about it there. You can't as a coach, as a manager, you can't directly affect a changing room. It's decided by the players within it. But what you can do is set your own cultural architects in that team, set your own senior players. What do you want the player to be? In terms of Manchester United, what do you want a Manchester United player to be? And then pick those players that fit that mold and then make those the leaders of your team. So you're essentially manipulating the environment. The other thing is psychological safety and having people within a club being able to be free to experiment, express themselves, to fail, to make those mistakes, but to learn from them and then come back from it. Again, that quote, again, I really like, freedom is not freedom until it's freedom to fail. And within the jobs that players have and the jobs that staff and coaches have, they should have that freedom to experiment as well. Another one, quite a big one that I like is story and narrative, specifically having us story. What is the history of our club, our country? What makes us who we are? It's setting that us and them as well. So that's us. They are the values. They are the stories that make us who we are. And that's them. All right. That's Man City. That's Liverpool. That's what they do. And that's the opposite to us. And setting that narrative. And from that, growing our reason why we play and what we do. We don't do it to win. We don't do it to make profit, but we do it for a reason. We do it for the people. We do it for these values that we've set. And that kind of leads on to the last one, is having a leader, like Sean Dyche. What a great example of setting that higher vision. A great leader can set that higher vision, the story of what we're going to do in the future, and then articulating that and then grounding that as well in values, but in Sean Dyche's case, the non-negotiables, but then setting those as well in the way that embodies every single person within the team. So getting everyone together, what are our values, what are our non-negotiables, everything that we agree upon, that we all stand for, that we all work on day to day. And that feeds into our ultimate long-term vision over the next, say, 5 years. So they're kind of the things I'm taking away from it, and how to build culture, how to grow winning culture. And I think that's just such an important thing and such an interesting thing as well, especially in the case for Manchester United. It's quite an interesting insight into Dad's thoughts in that. But again, thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Another good episode, I think, there. And I'll see you again next week.
This is McClaren Performance.